Great. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first Workforce Week session. We are focusing this morning on digital recruitment marketing. It was really important to the Chamber and our partner, CFCU Credit Union, who's the sponsor of Workforce Week, and Live in Ithaca also as a partner, to offer some programming for our members and the broader community, really to address all of the changes that have happened related to workplaces in the last couple of years, initially brought on in large part by the pandemic, but things are just continuing to shift. And so, having fresh resources and new perspectives from area experts is something that we wanted to bring to our membership. So thanks for joining us today. There are 5 more sessions to come this week. We will put the link to all those in the chat in case anyone wants to register and add any additional sessions. But I am actually going to turn it over to Frawley, our Director of Operations and HR, and she's going to facilitate and complete our welcoming everyone to this session and to this week.
Thanks, Jennifer. Welcome, everybody. We're glad you could join us today. And those of you who are joining us after the fact, we appreciate that you are checking in. Like Jennifer said, I'm Carly Hansen. I'm the Director of Operations and HR here at Tompkins Chamber and Visit Ithaca. And we have 2 other presenters with us today who we're so glad were able to join us as experts in this field. First, we have Mary Kay Marks of Grammatech. And we also have Jody Frawley of Amplified Digital. And I will let them introduce themselves in just a moment. Because I'm going to start sharing my screen. We have a slide presentation for you, and then we'll leave plenty of time at the end for some questions, answers, and discussion. If you want to contribute any questions or have anything that's relevant to the content during the slideshow, feel free to use the raise hand function or put a question in the chat, and we'll keep an eye on that too to make sure that we get everyone's input and are able to discuss any questions that might arise. So let me get started here. Just want to make sure it says participants can see my screen, but sometimes I don't believe it. So I just want to check in and get some thumbs up. Okay, great. Thank you, everybody. All right. So we're going to start today with Mary Kay Marks, Corporate Recruiting Manager of Grammatech, Inc. Mary Kay, do you want to get us started?
Sure. So I've been recruiting for a little while, came from a sales and marketing background. So I have a little bit of an idea on the marketing side, but Jody really has done a great job putting her portion together. I'm going to present the practical side of this topic. So what to do before you do. And the reason why I thought it was so important is because I live recruitment every day. And I've come across a lot of issues. Grammatech has allowed for remote employees for many years before COVID. So I've been recruiting remotely for the last 4 years. And I just think it's important to think before, check the water before you dive in, basically. So that's essentially what I'm going to present today. Anyone who knows me knows I'm a huge chamber fan. I'm an extreme extrovert, so I love all the activities and just really happy to be here. Jody, take it away.
I will ditto that. I jumped in 2 feet to the chamber and became an ambassador as soon as I started getting involved. So I am also a chamber fan. Yes, Allie. Yes, Allie. So I have been working in marketing. This is my 31st year, 21 of which have been in digital marketing. So my greatest joke is that Google was 2 years old when I started. So Google's my big brother and I continue to learn from him and he keeps changing the rules on me. So just like big brothers often do. But I also spent many years, in different mediums and spent 8 years with Advanced Media New York as a recruitment marketing specialist. So that's where I put on not only my marketing hat, but my recruitment hat in terms of helping businesses become that employer of choice. So that's what I'll dig into. Mary Kay is going to lay all the great groundwork, and then we're going to look at all the different solutions to get your message in front of those right candidates and get them hired. So thank you. Thank you for having me.
And Katie, want to jump in?
Sure. So one of the first things to start thinking about with recruitment, and especially hybrid and remote, is have you laid the groundwork? Have you talked to your HR departments? Do you even have an HR department? Some companies are so small that, you're just shifting the hat from one person to another. One minute you're doing recruitment, the next day the CEO or, the president of the company is doing the recruitment. So a lot of times I mentioned the HR team and the legal team of a company mainly because there are a lot of different laws. And if you are constantly, looking at, oh, can we hire someone in a different state or can we do something different? How are you going to go about that? So I just like to say no before you go. First of all, is this going to be a temporary situation or long-term? Because here's the thing, since COVID, if you jump in and you say, okay, yeah, let's have a hybrid employee, we all know that sometimes those individuals are not going to want to go back in the office. It's part of what the Great Resignation is all about right now. And, that's a key part. So going back to step one, Carly's going to touch on this in a little bit too, but make sure you have the job description tailored to the role. Make sure you've ironed out the situation with your team members and you know what is going to be allowed, what's not going to be allowed, how you're going to, look at different aspects of things and really help determine not just do you want to have a hybrid or a remote employee, but what does it entail? What does that mean to you? Because hybrid may mean 1 day a week to you. It may mean 4 days a week to the employee who's applying to the role. So you need to be specific. So again, know before you go. Let's jump to the next slide, Carly. So let's think through house rules. What are some of the things that you're going to want to, really plan? Again, both of these are, I have them separated so that if you're looking at the presentation again, you can kind of think about it from your standpoint, but the top three apply to both. What are the rules? What are are you going to supply equipment, or is the individual going to have to buy equipment when they're working from home? Are you going to have 2 computers, or are they going to bring a laptop back and forth? All the parts and pieces of what is it to be hybrid or remote need to be thought through. And in your process, and I'll get to that in a little bit, but in your process, you need to think through a lot of this stuff even before you start planning out your process, because at Grammatech, we do a background check and then we send the equipment. Well, if the background check, if we give it 2 weeks and the background check gets done and we send out equipment and their start date is within 2 weeks, what are you going to do if the equipment isn't there? What are you going to do if it doesn't arrive through FedEx or whatever? So you need to really think things through. In the hybrid scenario, again, people don't want to go, is this temporary? Is it going to be something full term? How many days a week? So that seems easy, it's 2 days a week. Well, full days, what time is the start? Is it somebody who's answering the phone? And if that somebody is answering the phone, do they need to be available at 8 o'clock to be answering the phone, even though they are in a hybrid situation? Or, unfortunately, doesn't mean that some days, because someone else might not be there, they need to come in even though you've already established. You need to have this all planned out. And then the other thing is, does your team understand? We were talking yesterday about, I was talking to a candidate and the candidate was saying that, he would never be able to be in a situation where he was micromanaged in a remote scenario. So, or if you're in a hybrid or a remote scenario and your manager is, checking up on you, did you sign in? Are you on email, sending you messages in chat to make sure you're available? You need to have an understanding of what your team believes being in a hybrid situation is like. So moving along down the line here. Oh, no, still back up there, Carly, sorry. How are you going to pay that person? We had a situation recently where we had a candidate who came across to us who had all the skills that we wanted, but they were in a country that we don't do business in. What about a different state? Grammatech will register in every state we have employees in. There's a cost to that. Are you aware? If you are aware of that, is that something that your company can plan to do? If you already have employees in certain states, do you only want to focus on those states? So how you're going to pay the person is certainly important to the candidate, and it means a lot. So, and then we also had a situation about we program in an agile environment, which means the team scrums or has a daily stand up every morning. Basically just a meeting where they don't always stand up, but some teams do. And one of the things that we like to look at is what time is that scrum going to be? Because we have, an employee in Hawaii, we have people in California, we have people all over the United States and now in different countries on the product side. But what time's that meeting going to be? Because we had a situation where we had a candidate who said there was no way they were going to get up at 6 o'clock in the morning to be in a 9 o'clock scrum if they were in California. Well, does that mean your team then has to stay later in the day because, or, does that mean you're going to change the work hours or the meeting hours? So those are things you really need to think about in the structure. Last note on this slide is when you're thinking remote, the reverse is happening quite a bit right at the moment. California companies are coming to, one of the recruiters I work with out of Syracuse said that there's a shortage for accounting people in our area because California companies are coming to Central New York, hiring remotely accounting people, paying them low California wages. Those low California wages are high Central New York wages. So when you're starting to look at where you might consider having a remote employee, if you're thinking, oh, I'll get a marketing person from New York City, be prepared. That marketing person from New York City may be double what you're going to pay for someone in the area. Now, you might find someone part-time and you might find someone who has their reasons to accept less money, but cost of living comparisons is important. Now we can go, Carly. Thanks. Interview process. So we were talking as we were just logging in this morning about the different means of interviewing, Zoom, Google Meet, Teams, just on the telephone. I do all of my first interviews over the phone. It's an old habit. It's so that I don't bring any physical bias other than voice into the call. It also gives me a chance to really listen and not be distracted by the physical. But what does your process look like? What are you going to consider your process to be? You really need to think it through because it is not going to be easy when you get to the end to keep adding other pieces onto it. And in a remote situation, employees really like, or candidates really like to know what is the process. They don't get to meet you in person. So because they're not going to get to meet you in person, they really want to know, what am I going to have to do? What does it entail? How many interviews? Other questions that you might ask, but you really need to lay out what your rules are for being remote or hybrid in that site. And then finally, or not finally, but mainly, are you bringing them on site at all? Since COVID, all of the employees that I've hired with the team at Grammatech have been hired completely remotely. And that's impressive, but it's also, I don't know if I could have done that. I joke around and say it all the time. I'm such a people person. I would want to know and meet the people, but I guess you you know, if you spend enough time in the interview process and really flushing it out, there is the opportunity to get to know people. Once hired, how are you going to onboard? Again, I'm going to switch to the company equipment in a minute, but you know, what is your process going to be, and how are you going to introduce them to other people on the team, and what are you going to do, you know, with a training plan? If you're a smaller company, training plans seem to be sort of, and I'm not criticizing because I've worked for many small companies, but usually tend to be, you know, come watch me do what I do and see how it's done. But, you know, those training plans will only make you more successful in the end. And then again, on the equipment subject, we already talked a little bit about this, but laptops, iPads, cell phones, different states. California now requires if you have a remote employee, you should be paying for their internet. Are you going to reimburse other states for their internet? If they have cell phones, is it a personal cell phone or is it a company provided cell phone? And if it is a personal cell phone, is there an allowance? So all of these things are things that when someone's coming in and just picking up a phone in an office, you probably don't think of, but as you move forward in this remote world and the hybrid world, you know, the hybrid, it's even more difficult because you're, again, some days you're in the office, some days you're at home. Well, what's the story going to be there? Success. What does it look like to you? Of course, for COVID, everybody was, you know, went remote because we had to. Success was not getting your employees sick, not getting yourself sick, you know, saving lives. There was a whole lot to being hybrid or remote during COVID. But now as we move forward, what are you thinking about from that side of that point of view, and what looks like success for you? So I'll have a couple of questions in just a minute on this subject, but think about it while I go through some of the other things, because it is important to start at the end in this process and look at what does success mean? What does a, uh, a good hire, what is that going to be for you? What are the qualifications? Do you really need all the skills you'd like, or you know, are you looking for certain type of talent? We hire programmers mainly on our product and our research side, so it's very specific to what the team is looking for, is this certain type of skills. But when you're in situations where the skills can be less defined, you might want to define at least a few to help you really target and really focus on what you're going to allow. And again, the training plan for the role, it's always important. Once you hire someone, and we all know this all too well, and you let them work either in a hybrid situation or remotely, it's really hard to call them back into the office. It's really hard to say, oh, sorry, that didn't really work for me. Worked great for you, but not so great for me. And so how do you dial that back? So my point of this conversation, of this topic, as you can see from the questions, is, are you asking yourself enough questions to really define the role and really understand what you are going to allow? Some of it will morph, some of it will become, you know, just part of your company culture. But if you start with at least a good plan and know before you go, you'll be able to make a really good hire. So let me ask some questions to the group. How many of you have remote employees now, and what is bringing on the interest in the subject of hiring either hybrid or remote employees in the future?
Good morning. This is Roberta. I'm from Park Foundation. So we have one employee that went fully remote as a byproduct of the pandemic. He actually left the area. So we now have one full-time remote person. So that's been an interesting switch for us. And the rest of us all continue to work a hybrid model, but we've really still kept it very fluid. And we may be increasing capacity later in the year and hiring for a position that would also be hybrid. So that's why this was of interest to us this morning.
And was it easy for your team to, I mean, obviously if you all went hybrid sort of at the same time, that probably was a little bit easier, but was it easier for your team to adjust to the remote person?
I think it was an established person. So it just started January of this year. So we went through the bulk of it with everybody, not here at all, and then here sporadically as we moved through the pandemic. And then he wanted to switch. So I think in part because we'd been doing it for almost 2 years, because we'd had a flood before the pandemic hit. So we'd had a business disruption, and we're sort of remote-ish or hybrid-ish before even March of 2020. So, and because he was an established employee, we were comfortable with doing it. I think if we were hiring somebody brand new, there would be a little more resistance to bringing on somebody fully remote that you don't have an established relationship with.
I don't disagree with you there. I was very nervous. Again, from my own personal perspective, I was very nervous at how successful we could be hiring remotely, a complete remote process. When I joined the company, because we switched to all the interviews remote, and when the candidate was hired, we brought them on site. And in that process, I was really nervous because I would want to get to know the people that I'm working with. So I knew that I had to let go of some of my fears of not getting to know my team as well. And we were extremely successful. And I'm really, in the 4 years I've been at Grammatech, I would have to say more than 50%, maybe it's even 60% of the people I hired have been remote, and some I've never met, to this day. So anyway.
Great.
Could I jump in and tell a really quick story, Mary Kay?
Sure.
Because the company that I worked for before Amplified, I had started a week before we went into complete, lockdown. And I can tell you, it has a lot to do with the leadership on how well you can adjust. We did group meetings every single day at lunchtime. We did games. They worked really hard to keep that cohesive unit. Now, when I was hired, I was going to be hybrid. I was not going to be required to go into the office, but it was available for me to come to, So I will say, from a leadership standpoint, when you work really hard to keep that cohesive team together, to get to know each other. I got to know all of my colleagues remotely because we were in lockdown for so long. I had been there a week before we went into lockdown. So I give kudos to the companies. That's one way to really get to know everybody. And games, and, they'd send gift cards, and, we did happy hours, and it was a really great environment. So just to share that experience.
Miss Sally Evans.
So at FoodNet, and in a lot of the social services roles here in Tompkins County, I feel that there still needs to be a personal connection. And I'll say personal connection because my own view of what personal connection has changed because of the pandemic, but there still needs to be a personal connection with someone who is from here or is here and present and seen. And seen now is on Zoom in a square. It's seen in town. It's seen at Wegmans. So my perception of what all of those things means has grown during the pandemic, and you have to be deliberate about doing those things. But it seems that when we're hiring, it's like it's shifted everything's put on its head. I need a person but the person is here to do the job. And I really have to unpack what the job is more than I've ever had to do to see if the people who are applying on Indeed or we're getting people from all over the world literally applying for a job here. Their skills might be great, but is it critical for them to be a part? Does their face need to be here on Zoom only? I mean, so the reason for me participating in this particular session in this workforce is that how can I help myself transition to these new ways of thinking and new ways of being okay with what does hybrid mean for me, but also for them, because it's about the work that they're doing for me, not it's about them. So right now we're hybrid because I feel like sometimes people need the opportunity to be away from the office to do some of their work. I'm fine with that. What does that look like? It's a little nebulous. Could that be perceived as laissez-faire and it doesn't matter? Probably. So I need to map it out a little bit so that there's some accountability. But will I be completely remote? Probably not, because I do think it's important for people to have a face here. How do you guys deal with that, Mary Kay?
So, you're absolutely right, that in certain roles and certain aspects of things. So I'm trying to hire an office manager in our Bethesda office to work with our executive team. Well, I've got all these people who apply to an office management position, and I'm thinking, well, you're managing an office. The office is here. You're going to absolutely need to be on site. But it's not true. I've talked to a number of different people who are office managers who are either remote or in hybrid situations because they're with a company that has a receptionist, that has other, people, and they're bigger size company. So again, going back to what you just said, Ellie, what works for the candidate doesn't work for you. And you have to really kind of look at that, because for us, we need the office manager to be on site. Now, an accounting person in the same office, they could be hybrid, but for the office manager, we really want that person to be on site because they're going to be working with the executives there. So you need to kind of define in that job description that. One last note, the physical space also has to be defined. We recently had a situation where we were noticing with some of our remote interns that their location was a cafe or something, and it's really hard to have a meeting in a cafe sometimes. So you just have to keep those things in mind as well. Sarah?
Yeah, so one thing that I'm curious about is if you have noticed your position being accessible to a wider range of individuals, especially in terms of differently abled individuals who may not have been able to come into an office in the past or routinely guarantee that they could come into an office, but who can perform the work, especially when it's in a space that they already know accommodates their needs. I'm curious if you've noticed greater accessibility to job types than before.
So in an ideal world, absolutely, that now applies more than ever. We are a smaller company, only just over 100 employees, which maybe for Ithaca terms is not small, but for the nationwide, it is small. I would love to see more diversity in the applicants. I do think that by allowing for remote employees, we do have a variety of different things. When we first went remote, I had an intern who was blind. I went through the whole interview process and never knew it. When I made him the offer, he basically said to me, "So I have something really important to tell you about, Mary Kay." And I said, "What is that?" And he said, "Well, I'm considered legally blind." And I was shocked because, never did he ask for any concession of, during the interview process. And he said, basically, I just have to load some software on my computer that allows it to read the screen. And he had a very, very successful internship. So it does open the possibilities for, what might be a little bit more difficult. It does open those possibilities. I would love to see more of it. I certainly do what I can to promote the jobs at different locations to allow for it. But again, being a smaller company, I'm sure Google and Amazon and a lot of bigger companies are able to answer that question fairly easier.
Ali, thank you, Mary Kay and Sarah. Ali, I'm gonna let you jump in, and then we're gonna move along.
Great. My question is, I guess, we're a small company, we're working in this new landscape, and you get a great qualified candidate, and then they say, oh, well, I want this. And what is the wiggle room? I guess the question would be, Mary Kay, I know you pretty well. You're going to say, well, what did you tell them? And what is your job description? And what are the infrastructure things that you have? But what is the comfort zone for wiggling back? Everyone really is, the potential employee seems to be driving the boat. And what's your gut on when to say, nah?
So we are a government contractor. As a government contractor, Grammatech needs to be consistent, not only with their hiring process, but certain things. So if somebody asks for 5 weeks of vacation, and we offer 3, those are things we have to say no. Or they want to contribute to their 401k as soon as they join the company, and we're set up to have, it be the contribution be given to them a month after their year anniversary. There are certain things you cannot change. There are some other things that you can, if someone says, well, I don't want to start for a month or 2, you need to determine, is that going to work for your needs? And is it going to work for the needs of your team? I think personally on this subject, I tend to lean in favor of the candidate just because I am, that middle person, and I try to make it work. But if I had a candidate from Carnegie Mellon just coming out of college and said to me, he listed $150,000. He just graduated in his computer science program, and he said, I want $150,000 a year. And I said, so you listed 150, is that another company? Is that for another, area within the country? And he said, no, if you can't offer me 150, then I'm not interested in the role. I said, well, thank you very much for applying, because again, for just coming out of college with no experience, there are some things you do have to say no to, but certainly you can ask why, and I would investigate more. Because before you just say no, when you're looking at if they answer a question, I have people put wild salary ranges, and yes, maybe if they have to move to New York City, they need that salary range. But once you tell them they can work from home in, Maine or New Hampshire or wherever, they might change their requirements. So
That's a really good question, Ali. I think that I'm going to move on and talk a little bit about job description and job posting so that we can segue into Jody's section of marketing. I think that I just wanted to add a little bit there to what you said, Mary Kay, on that topic. I think that outside of that government contracting sector, you may have a little bit more wiggle room, right? You mentioned as small businesses or businesses who aren't contracting with municipalities of any kind. But the focus, I think, is always on really ensuring that you're being equitable, and that you can get into some troubling territory there if you're treating one candidate differently than another. Certainly bias is always a concern in those situations, but even if you're very consciously trying to avoid bias, need to be cognizant that not only can there be a perception there, but there really still can be an issue, because it's not only going to affect your decision making and this candidate that's in front of you, but it's also going to affect the future candidates that you have walking through your door and the future of your team as well. So, but thank you. That was a really good question. And a good segue, because now we can talk about job descriptions versus job postings. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on this because it really could be its own webinar in itself right now, especially the way that recruiting has changed in the face of COVID, and also the bigger lens that responsible companies are taking towards, investigating their diversity, equity, and inclusion practices as well. So there's a lot going on in the worlds of job descriptions and job postings right now, but it really does stand to mention in this context, I think. So, so I think what I really want to highlight is the difference between these two concepts, right? Traditionally, there was a lot more blending between these two things. The job description, very specifically, as you'll see here, it's very much a definition. It's a document that is defining for everyone, both the employers and the employees and the organization at large, what it takes to be successful in a role, and what a person should have to be meeting those role requirements, right? So it can be used as a tool for measuring someone's success, as we talked about, because this is the document that you can use to hold people responsible to their areas of work. But also it can also be a very good tool in your decision-making process when it comes to deciding whether or not you would like to make a hiring offer to people. Because especially now there's so much to be wading through, right? And you're doing your best to plan ahead for remote work and for hybrid work, right? But you really should be able to refer back to your job description to help you make tough choices between candidates, and really help you measure who may be the best fit for the role and who ultimately will be most successful. So that's an internal document, as mentioned there. And in the before times, your job posting may have looked a lot more like your job description, and really been a list of what skills that you were looking for, and exactly what responsibilities that the job entailed. And those days are kind of over, because we all find ourselves in this market where, the candidate is holding a lot of power and, has a lot of choice. And so Jody, you'll talk more about how to be that employer of choice to candidates, but I just wanted to mention the difference and the definition, or the defining characteristics between job descriptions and the new kind of version of job postings, and really talk about how important it is to consider your job posting as an advertisement now for yourself as an employer, and not only for the opportunity that the job itself might offer to a candidate, but also what the opportunity to be a part of your team and a part of your organization looks like, right? So you're selling yourself in a job posting. So you're going beyond those skills and you're going beyond those responsibilities. You're doing the best you can to incorporate, what your company culture is like. Are you a fun culture? That's going to change the tone of your job posting. It's going to change and affect the language that you're using. Talk about your mission and your vision, and what really drives you as a company, as a team, and what you're wanting is for these people to, and these candidates to relate to this job posting and see themselves in it, right? So another big selling point right now is your company values, right? So does your company value diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how do you communicate that to a candidate that you are, looking to bring on your team? And then lastly, just be engaging with a person, don't make it cold and calculated. Perhaps there's a company in a role out there and a candidate who may be, looking for that really straightforward communication and want just that kind of bare bones, layout of what the expectations might be right off the bat. But really what the whole recruiting and HR world is seeing right now is that the more you can relate to people in your job posting and in the language about who you're looking for and why they should be part of your organization, should be the focus. So be engaging and really speak to what people are looking for in a remote and hybrid position, if that's what you are, looking to bring someone on board. So considering all the things that Mary Kay talked about, and what matters to people who are looking for remote work, and making sure that you're able to incorporate those into your job posting somehow. It's a challenge. There are a lot of resources out there as to, how to explore, writing and engaging job posting, because it really is very different these days and new to a lot of people who haven't had to tackle that kind of task before. It can be kind of daunting, but it's definitely an important one and worth some additional effort and additional look if you haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. Does anyone have any questions? We could take a lot of time in the job posting versus job description, but if you have a question, you're welcome to put it in the chat and we'll try to address it before we leave today. And anything that we're not able to get to, I'm happy to gather some information and we can follow up as well in a communication with our slideshow today. Good. Okay. I'm going to pass it over to Jody. Mary Kay said she has the prettiest and fanciest presentation of all of us. Thanks,
It's
Jody.
not really that pretty, but and I'm really going to add on to everything we've been talking about. You've noticed I'm putting things in the chat as things come. I hope that's helpful to you when you're talking about those job descriptions. Those are the types of things that I dive into with employers to think about what's important to the candidate. You know what you need from that candidate. You have the job description. Now put your other hat on and sell it, right? Because the power is all in the candidate's hands right now. So being able to sell it is important. The couple of the links I put in there, I love how they break it down and actually mention perks and benefits. Again, thinking along those lines. The first link was really, there's a nice video on there, and these are right on their actual website, but it's the same concept if you're putting in a job posting and what have you. So I encourage you to take a look at that and start paying attention to it. There's some people that are doing really great jobs on selling the job, selling the culture of the company, and becoming an employer of choice. I'll tell a really quick story before we dive in. My son, 23-year-old, fresh out of college, was in a great job selling advertising, ironically, kind of one of my competitors, but hated the culture. And he kept seeing this video production company putting things out on social media. And he's like, this place looks cool. How are they getting these businesses? And he started following them. Next thing you know, he applied for a job. And he went through, it wasn't easy, but he put this company in his sights that that's where he wanted to work. Working all sorts of angles, networking, trying to get in there. His first interview got rescheduled. His second interview, they decided they couldn't hire at that time. He stayed after it, finally got an interview, and now he's been working there about 6 months, already been promoted, happier than anybody I've ever seen, doing exactly what he wants to do. But I tell that story because, I hear a lot of opposite stories of how hard it is to get someone to work at your company. And when you're not focused on always marketing your company as a great place to work, that is the case. If it, going back to what Mary Kay said of the temporary versus long-term recruitment, in my view, if you're always going to be hiring, you should always be marketing yourself as if you are hiring and developing that talent pool, because that will make the difference that people will come knocking on your door and want to work at your company. And it's going to be the best of the best coming. I'm not saying my son's the best, but he definitely knew what he wanted, and it's a perfect fit for him. And he was persistent to go there. So let's dive into the, some tactics you can use to get your message in front of the right people. Okay. I already mentioned social media. I want to be specific on this because I see a lot of HR folks will use social media just to post jobs. And I want you to think beyond that. I want you to think about that culture you're building, that you're looking for a team member that's going to fit with your culture, and start sharing those intangibles. Every time there's a birthday you're celebrating, every time you're supporting a not-for-profit, you're taking pictures and you're doing videos, anniversaries, just giving shout outs to, employees that are doing a great job, and having employees do shout outs for themselves. to their coworkers. There's so much more beyond just posting your job opening on social media, right? Using video is so strong. And I'm going to share my screen here real quick to play a video. Oh, I guess you'll have to stop sharing for a minute. Excellent. To play a video that I think will be something that you might enjoy. It's very different. It's not what you would normally think of. And I hope that I selected what I needed to get the audio. So someone will tell me.
Wake up, tune out the noises from my past and look up, remember where my help comes from. Yeah. Push back, I'm tired of feeling broken. Truth rings louder than emotion. Take time, remember what it means to love. Yeah. Here's another chance to see the change we need. See a miracle when we walk these streets. Living life in the light, redefining the land of the free. I can feel it, there's something in the water. Anything is possible. Come on and move like the power of the river. Anything is possible.
What did you think of that? Did you see any salary requirements, job requirements? This is what we're hiring for. None of that, right? Oh, sorry. Let me stop that. Sorry about that. It was selling their culture, right? It was giving you a great idea, a sense of teamwork, collaboration, family, what's important. You're going to be able to master your craft, all of the things that are important to the candidate when they're looking for work. Yes, they eventually want to know how much you're going to pay them. Are they going to have benefits? How many vacation days will they have? But they, from an overall marketing standpoint of your company, they want to get a sense of what it's like to work there, So, and one of the tactics that we can use to get in front of people that you're trying to recruit. So going back to thinking about those folks that you want to be working there, making sure it's a diverse and equitable, all-inclusive type of environment that you're promoting, that you want to reach out to. You can use video that you've created, which is telling your story in a compelling manner, and schedule it so it appears in front of the exact people you're trying to be in front of. Now, there's different ways you can do it by job title. You do it by geographic. So, if you are looking at a larger space, a geographic area, and you've done your research and there's a bunch of engineers in this part of the world that I want to recruit in, you can geographically target your message to those folks. But beyond that, maybe it is a more local. You can say, I only want people within a 30-mile radius to know about our opportunities, and I want to have my message in front of them. But video, I encourage everyone to do video to tell your story, and then use it in a pre-roll format, right? Use it on your social media, put it on your website, include it in any email blast you're doing, take it to your job fairs. Once you have your videos created where you're telling your story, use it everywhere, right? So a couple of, those tactics there. Email. This is something that if you had asked me even 5 years ago about doing email campaigns, it would have been, oh, really? Aren't we all overwhelmed with email? I can tell you they still work. For every dollar you invest in a targeted email campaign, your return on investment is $43 return. Now with jobs, with recruitment, you can say, all right, I want to recruit in this geographic area. I want these job titles. Or you could say, I want to reach people in this industry. There's so many different ways that you can slice and dice who your message is going to. But so targeted email is a great way. And that's another way it's a one-on-one invitation too. So you think about it, someone is reaching out to you, you get an email and you're thinking, oh, what's this? What do they want from me? It's a very personal medium. So when you're talking through your messaging on there, you want to talk as though you're speaking right to them. This is who we're looking for. We're looking for you. And here's why you want to look at us as a place to work. Geofencing is an interesting solution to look at. If you know that the majority of the candidates that have the skills you're looking for work at this place or that place or this organization, you can actually geofence that location, capture their mobile IDs as long as they have at least one app open, and start serving your messages to them next time they go online with their mobile device. Now, some people don't think this is very nice, and it could seem that way, I'll be honest. But you also need to realize that 70% of employees would consider a new opportunity if it was a compelling enough message. They already have the skills. They could have a bad day at work and suddenly see your message, go, what do they have to offer? And click on there and find out more. I will add is something to think about with this type of tactic is make sure that the application that they're going to is mobile responsive. I've run into this way too many times. I know it's wonderful to use an applicant tracking system, but so many of them are not mobile responsive. So you may want to think of creating a mobile landing page to make it easy, or do a quick apply, because the chances are the action they'll take is on their mobile device when they see the ads. So you need to follow that through all the way to make sure you make it as easy as possible for them to take that next step to reach out to you. Maybe it's a phone call you want them to make. I mean, in these challenging times, there are recruiters I speak with that says, I just want them to call me, start a conversation, especially healthcare. I do a lot of healthcare recruitment. Nurses, we know, are so difficult to hire. So, thinking about it all the way through. And I see things coming in the chat, but I'm not reading them. If we need to stop and answer questions, let me know, Carly, or if we want to do it at the end.
Yeah, so there are, Allie put a question in the chat and I'm happy to address it now. That's fine. I do want to just give everyone a heads up. Our session today is scheduled to go until 10:15. I recognize that some people may need to jump off at 10, and that's completely fine, but we will be going till 10:15 today, and again, be sending our presentation out, and then our link to the presentation will be available at a later date as well. So if you have to go, we understand, but sure, I would love to hear Allie's question. Allie's put in the chat, can we address the concept of poaching employees as part of what is happening in recruitment? That's a pretty broad question, Allie, but we can talk about it for a long time. But did you have something more specific that you were wondering?
Just it's happening, and is this now what we need to do in recruitment? I mean, is that what recruiters do, Mary Kay? You like call people and say, hey, how are you doing? So just because it seems like it's happening, and I don't want to be left behind. And if it is a part of recruitment, then we need to bone up on our skills in that.
So there's a definitely, I always say, I've worked as a headhunter where you're an agency recruiter who's going in trying to find specific talent for specific companies. And there have been times at Grammatech where I worked at, put on my headhunter hat for specific roles. That really poaching, and so it's the common term, but poaching or recruiting candidates away from other companies, it happens all the time, the truth. But the reality is what is your philosophy behind it? Is that how you want to gain employees? Because a poachable candidate the first time is probably going to be able to be poached a second time. So you have to kind of keep that in mind. But you know, if you're doing an email campaign or targeted campaign or something like that, that's all, everything's you know, is a form of poaching. It's just
Right.
how blatant is it going to be? So
Mhm.
we both worked at Seaboard, and we, you know, were at Seaboard for a while, and there was a couple of employees who left Seaboard and went to another company in the Ithaca area. And those employees were telling what a great scenario they had at this new place. And it was considered poaching, but realistically, it just was, you know, a different manager, a different scenario. I don't know if I would have called it poaching, but recruitment is always some form of poaching. So, so I
Yeah.
think you have, as leadership, have to understand and define what that means to you, and then go from there.
Right. Right. And I have those conversations too, that there's two buckets you're always talking to: the people who are actively looking and the passive candidates. And as I mentioned, 70%, it's probably even higher than that at this point, would consider a new job if the right opportunity came up. So that's why you're always advertising, you're always talking about. I want to jump into, and Allie, you were right on in terms of your recruitment video can also translate to donors and marketing in general. Absolutely. Should always be thinking of all your goals in mind with your recruitment videos. But other interesting tactics to think about, maybe sponsored content is something you want to think about. This is more of an educational soft sell, but it lives in the editorial side of news sites versus the ad side. So it's a different part of the brain that you're appealing to, and just sharing all the good news that's happening at your organization. Think of it as newsy information that would be important to a candidate if they knew about it. At accreditations you're receiving, expanding, getting new equipment in, whatever might be important, training that have been implemented. Anything newsy that would also be important to a candidate is what you would put in a sponsored content type of solution. And the beauty is, it's like PR on steroids. You write up what you want people to know, and then you deliver it to the people that you want to see it. So it's a marketing tactic, but it looks like it's editorial. And it will always say, sponsored content or advertorial or something to that effect. So you're not being deceptive, but it lives in the different space of any brand safe publisher site. So that's something to consider. Streaming audio, again, thinking about where your best candidates are. Are you trying to recruit, the millennials or the Gen Z or even the Gen Xers? I mean, this world has become so digital. It's not just terrestrial radio anymore. And you want to be thinking about those streaming audio opportunities to get in front of them. You want to go to the last slide. The last part I always like to say is make sure you're tracking everything you're doing, right? If you get them to your website, continue to stay in front of them. That's the hardest part. You get them to your website, continue to stay in front of them with a remarketing ad to let them know, with a little bit different messaging than you used to get them there the first time. But maybe you didn't get a chance to cover a few other perks and benefits of working at your company that you have in an ad that follows them around. Tracking with what's called a UTM code or view through tracking is another really great way to know which solutions are really resonating, what's bringing in the best results. When you go into your Google Analytics on your website, you can know, okay, these clicks came in through my streaming audio ad, these came in from my video, these came in from my geofencing or what have you. And a view through tracking pixel is pretty interesting, that it literally will tell you someone saw my ad, they didn't click on it, but they came to my website at a later time. So again, it's all branding, it's all marketing, it's getting your message in front of them, but being able to know how many did I, get my message in front of that actually did take action, even if they didn't click through. So that's really important to be able to measure what you are doing and get a sense of what's really resonating and how you're telling your story. And that's all I had for my portion. So questions, thoughts, challenges you're faced with that we have time to work through.
So Jody, I think that one thing that you bring, full face to me is that sometimes you do get so busy in recruiting, and if somebody else is responsible for the marketing piece, like I have no idea about my click-throughs. And I mean, on my applicant tracking system, I certainly am able to look to see where candidates are coming from, which job posting they're coming from, whether it be LinkedIn or the Department of Labor or Indeed or Glassdoor or something where it's pulled from the site out to those locations. But yeah, the reality is, do I know how many click-throughs? That's the note I want to go find out more about that.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's great, Mary Kay. Thanks for mentioning that. Sarah.
Sarah,
Yeah, I was curious if you ever recommend different messaging for different job types or different demographics. One of the things that stood out to me in the Stickley video that you shared, it was beautiful and there were a lot of things that were very compelling to me. But then there was also the language around it being a family, which a lot of younger generations don't appreciate thinking of their company as a family. So I'm curious how much you shift that based on the demographic and how much it's consistent for the culture of the company overall.
All the time I shift it. There are conversations that I have when I'm, talking with a first student buses who's trying to recruit for bus drivers and, monitors. Totally different conversation, totally different places we're going to find those folks than if you're recruiting for, an IT person or engineering or what have you, versus the social channels you're going to use and the places you're going to, you have to think about where are your best candidates spending time. So you want to be where they're spending their time. And then you want to use that language, absolutely to your point, Sarah, of what's going to be important to them. We know millennials, from research that we've done, that it's really important for them to feel they're making an impact in their job. So really sharing your mission and what's important to you as a company is a selling point for you to attract that group, versus, attracting a baby boomer or a Gen X or what have you. So, and obviously we're not targeting by demographics, by, any of that, but what's going to work with your culture. And so in the language you're using, in the photos and people you're using, you are in a sense, saying this is who we want to attract. People want to see somebody that looks like them, in the messaging that you're doing. So it's very subtle in how you can do that, but certainly you can, by where you're delivering the message, appeal to different groups. Yeah, Allie.
So a small organization, do we continually recruit or do we only recruit when we have an opening? Because in our case, some of our employees stay with us for a very long time. Pandemic caused a big monkey wrench in that, but the folks that we have been with us for years, and that I don't see that changing necessarily because the people who are coming are but do we put the cost into a video? Do we only show it when we're actively recruiting, or do people call us and say, I want to apply, and we don't have anything at that time? I mean, that hasn't happened in the last, year or two, but I mean, in normal times, is that the way it was?
Yeah.
I don't know. What's the cadence for that?
If you know or have a sense that there always will be at least an opening in your company, then I think it's fine to have something out there. You want to change that up a little bit anyways, though. I would look at sharing your culture through social media, through your website, in-person events is still that subtle way where you're always recruiting in a sense. You're sharing what it's like to be there. So you're setting yourself up as an employer of choice, whether you're hiring right now or not. Your messaging may change when you have more urgent needs, but I think it's important to always celebrating your employees, because that's important.
yeah, Allie, I
Okay,
think it's kind of like soft recruiting versus actual recruiting. And the fact of the matter is, if I know I have to hire someone in 6 months of a certain skill level and it's going to take me a while to get there. I might post a job but I'm going to tell the candidate in the first phone call that this is not an immediate hire. This is something we're working on. We hope to have the person start within a certain, does that fit in with what you're looking for? And then, you're kind of keeping things. So even if they do apply to a position and you don't have an open position at the moment, you can kind of relate to, that kind of tactic where you let them know in the first call. Again, if they have the skills and it's, something you're gonna, so I have a candidate that I talked to over a year ago who's finishing up his PhD program and he's on a postdoc and he applied, but then he wasn't looking to make a decision very quickly. Well, it's been a year and I'm still talking to him and, will I have a position when he makes his final decision? I'm not sure, but the fact of the matter is I'm going to try, so I'm going to keep it going. So, those are things as a leader that you just have to kind of consider. And how much time does it take? Because if it's taking a lot of your time or a lot of your staff's time to continue that process, then you might want to pull back on it a little bit. So
I want to bring up 2 points that you made me think of. Recruitment is just like marketing, that those candidates are moving into the cycle at different times, right? So that's why that longer term is important to keep in mind, because they have that bad day, their managers mean to them, whatever, that can be the trigger. And they may have, saw your ad 3 weeks ago, but it made that impression, right? Your messaging was in front of them. The other point I want to make is the onboarding process, or between that interview and onboarding process. I was reading a study recently that talked about if it is a long period of time in between that first, interview versus when you are able to hire, you need to be staying in touch with them and updating, because otherwise you will lose them. The candidates have all the power right now. And if you want to make sure you're getting the best talent and the best fit for your company and team, you have to stay in touch with them. That was a study I read recently. And I thought of one of the third point, because we talked about tracking and measuring. I know it's difficult to track all the way through if you are going to an ATS system. You can track at least that click from the button to get into the ATS, but then you lose it from there. And I know that's a frustration for many of the folks I work with, some of the larger companies that use ATSs, because they're great systems from everything else. But the tracking from the marketing through is a little more challenging.
Yeah, I wanted to add one more thing, and I don't want to scare anyone, but I do want to make the point that whether you're hiring or not, or whether you're recruiting or not, your reputation as an employer is always out there, right? It doesn't matter. I totally am on board with Jody. Videos are worth everything in the world, right? But nothing is worth more than what you're putting into practice on a day-to-day basis. So, really making sure that you're always putting the effort into your day-to-day relationship with your employees and with your team is always going to be valuable on every level, but also in recruiting, and also when you need to start looking outside for a new team member. That is groundwork that's just irreplaceable. It's just not something that can be changed with any amount of marketing or with any amount of, interviewing style or outreach. That's always going to be kind of the number one most important thing that, is representing you as an employer. And that's what, the most savvy of candidates, and certainly your immediate community, are always going to know those things about you and have very easy access to that information, especially in this digital age. That reputation is going to precede you. And that's just kind of the reality that we're living in. So taking the time and the energy and using those resources to put into the team you have today is very important.
Yes, so let's just add to it, and networking. So I just have to say, when I joined Grammatech and went to my first chamber meeting, I had, so what does Grammatech do? And granted, still happens, just not as not as often as it used to, or not even what does Grammatech do? Who is Grammatech? We've been in Ithaca for 30 years and people don't know about us. But by using activities with the chamber and getting out in the community, when you start looking for people and you post it on your LinkedIn, I get messages all the time from people who are looking for jobs. I will just say I'm going to, embarrass Allie, but I recruited Allie to the Ithaca area. So I will pat myself on the back because she has been a force, not only at the chamber, but at a variety of different organizations. And, having that relationship and working with people is also, it's your own personal testament to a company and how it kind of expands from there. So.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Mary Kay. I do need to wrap us up because it is 10:15.
Look at that. Right
Also,
on
thank
time.
you. Yes, yes.
We made it.
Yeah, I appreciate everyone being here today. As Jennifer said, we have 5 great sessions remaining this week. Please visit our website and look at our events calendar to check out what else you can join, and keep an eye out on our social media. We'll be talking about it there as well. So thank you to Mary Kay Marks of Grammatech, and thank you to Jolie Frawley of Amplified Digital. I hope you all have a great day. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Carly. Bye,
Thank
everyone.
you. Bye, all.